All right. Um, it is currently 2 a.m. on July 11th. It's 10 days in, and I've gotten to 35. So, about a third of the month's over, and I'm over a third of the way done with the list. Yeah, I'd say I'm pretty happy with the progress so far. So, let's get into what I watched. To start off the month, I watched Network, directed by Sidney Lumet. Or Lumet. Whatever. This is already a disaster. I have to say, great way to start the month. It's a very interesting film, specifically about how the media takes advantage of people or different causes and transforms them into spectacles, essentially. It's a hilarious movie, incredibly funny. This film, basically predicts Alex Jones and his rise to fame with the main character, he's not quite Alex Jones, but he's clearly in need of, mental health treatment. What's also interesting is the way the film shows how basically these media companies, not only are they only after, views and profit from those views, but it also shows how they really don't care about what they're showing. It doesn't matter that, some of the people that they have on their network they're completely antithetical to their profit motive. What's also interesting is that those people that they take and make spectacles out of, they ultimately also become corrupted by getting more attention and money from their fame and success. There is, for example, a radical Marxist communist character in the film who is, very dedicated to their beliefs until the network offers them, a ton of money and the ability to broadcast those beliefs to, millions of viewers. It's just a very interesting take on the media and how they, manipulate people. Great film. After that, I watched The Imitation Game. It's basically just a biopic about Alan Turing, and I'm glad that they specifically focus on his time, creating a Turing machine and decoding Nazi, ciphers or encryption. It makes for a much more focused film than I think it would be if it covered his entire life, although it does, explore more than just his time there. And I thought it was a engaging, enjoyable biopic, but it is definitely not really anything greater than that, I found. Good film, enjoyable film, but it definitely doesn't elevate to anything more than that, in my opinion. After that, I watched Serpico, which is another Sidney Lumet film, or Sidney Lumet. I should have looked up how you pronounce his name, but I didn't. And this is a pretty engaging film about an undercover police officer, or it follows Officer Frank Serpico. It does a really good job of showing how his dedication to weeding out all of the corruption within the NYPD led to his kind of almost self-destruction. He becomes, a lot more volatile over time because he's just so focused on his job and the, paranoia that comes with it. I think it's a very engaging film. I don't think that this film really grabbed me as much as it maybe could have, but it's still a good film, interesting watch, would recommend. Then to round out my first day, I watched Safety Last. This is a Harold Lloyd film, and it's most famous for its scene where he climbs up an 11-story building with, plenty of hijinks going on around him. He's pretty famously, dangling from the face of a clock. It's a pretty fun, short, silent film. I would recommend it if you are looking for something light. But a lot of the humor is based on, putting yourself in these, really awkward social situations and trying to not get caught in them. A lot of that stuff is really not, for me, it gives me anxiety. It's enjoyable, but I didn't love it. Then for day two, what a day. I decided to watch all the Ice Age films, just all of them, all at once, which maybe that was a mistake. It might have been, but About 30 minutes into the first Ice Age, I was strongly regretting my decision. The animation in the first Ice Age looks terrible. Even considering it was made in 2002, there are films from 2002 and before 2002 that look way better than this film. It has an incredibly boring plot. It's incredibly predictable. Like, it works, I guess. It's not like the character arcs don't make sense or anything. All the pieces fit, but it's just awful to get through. It's a slog. None of the jokes are funny. Sid is especially annoying. Really, the only good part is Scrat, and that's kind of it. I guess Manny has PTSD, which is, they never bring it back in any future movies, but whatever. Ice Age 2 was also very bad. I think I enjoyed this one more than the first one because it was at least, stupid, I guess. It was more absurd and dumb, and I think that is a lot easier to handle when you're watching a bad movie than something that's just boring. It was a more enjoyable experience, but it still was not good. By the end of the second movie, I had a pretty bad headache, and I was ready to give up for the day, but I took some ibuprofen, I got rid of it, and I was ready to chug on. I have to say I'm glad I did, because Ice Age Dawn of the Dinosaurs was actually pretty enjoyable. It's a very fun film. It looks way better than the previous Ice Ages, and it also is so much more vibrant and lively than most of the previous ones. Plus you have some characters that are actually pretty fun and engaging to watch do their thing. Simon Pegg plays a very enjoyable, Crocodile Dundee, Steve Irwin type character. And overall, it's a genuinely a pretty enjoyable animated movie. It definitely doesn't break any new ground, but it's an enjoyable experience. The fourth Ice Age, Continental Drift, is back to being not very good, but still better than the first two. The pirate monkey is cool, I guess. I like the grandma. She's a funny character. Is another Ice Age film. There's one more after this. The final Ice Age is Collision Course, which, again, I think it's still better than the first two because it's just so absurd. The Scrat parts of this movie are easily the best in the franchise and are genuinely really fun. He goes to space. He literally goes to space, and he pilots an alien spaceship around. It's not very good, but I had already watched 4 other Ice Age movies. I think I was doing okay. Maybe part of my enjoyment was just that I'd watched 4 other Ice Age movies and I was losing my mind at that point, but day number 3, I started off with Sanshiro Sugata, which is Akira Kurosawa's first film, and I have to say, it's pretty good. I mean, I guess I wasn't expecting an incredible movie, considering it was his first film, but it's still a really enjoyable time. Just a very engaging and engrossing experience. It is definitely more amateurish than some of his later stuff, but you can definitely see all of the elements of his later films in this one. It just makes for a really enjoyable story. After that, I watched Downfall. This is a film that basically chronicles the last days of Hitler's life as he is stuck in his bunker, as he is desperately trying to not let everything just crumble around him. It's a pretty interesting look at Nazism at the end of everything, when it's on its way out, essentially. I do wish there was more emphasis on how senseless a lot of the violence is at this point, how so many people are just being brutally killed and slaughtered because Hitler just refused to let them surrender. I guess I wanted a little bit more of this movie. After that, I watched Rope. This is an Alfred Hitchcock movie, and kind of the, gimmick of it is that almost all of it is done in one shot, or it's made to look like it's one shot. It's not actually. It's very obvious where the cuts are. I have to say, as someone who doesn't really enjoy that many Hitchcock movies, this was a huge surprise. I loved this film. It is just one of the most tense and interesting thrillers I've seen. I'm pretty sure Hitchcock regarded this film as a failure, but I think it's his best movie, at least out of the ones I've seen. It's generally just such an interesting and intriguing idea for a movie where the two main characters kill someone within the first minute, and then the entire rest of the movie is just them trying to get away with it. It won me over. It's incredibly tense. I love the performances. It's just a really engaging thriller, and I wasn't really expecting that from a Hitchcock movie since I haven't been super big on most of the rest of his stuff. Then after that, I watched Raya and the Last Dragon, which was an enjoyable Disney movie. It wasn't really much more than that. Doesn't really do anything too special, but there's some fun action. The moral is good. It works. It's enjoyable, I guess. One thing, however, that annoys me about this movie, and basically all Disney animated movies, is just the character designs. Why does the dragon look like Elsa? She's a dragon. She can look like anything, and you made her look like Elsa. Anyway, after that I watched Airplane Mode, the Logan Paul movie that's a parody of Airplane, which is weird because Airplane's already... It already makes fun of other movies and cliches. For all of the bad jokes and sexist humor and racist humor and kind of homophobic humor, it's not as bad as I was expecting. There is something to the absurdity in this movie that makes it a lot more enjoyable, and it's honestly pretty bearable to watch just because of how insane a lot of it is. It doesn't feel like it does it with very much self-awareness, but it wasn't as terrible as I was expecting it to be. Then I watched Grand Illusion. This is a pretty famous war film set during World War II about prisoners kept in internment camps, and this one just didn't do anything for me. I think there's a lot of interesting subtext you can read into about the way the characters interact with each other and certain lines of dialogue, but ultimately I just found it really boring. I found the performances to just not be very captivating. Maybe this is one I need to watch again. It just feels very melodramatic. Certain plot lines that are just kind of shoved in at the end that I felt were very unnecessary. It's certainly an interesting film, and I'd recommend watching it, but it didn't do anything for me. Then after that, I watched The Nightmare Before Christmas. Excellent animated movie directed by Henry Selick, and it just has so much personality and style to it. It's gorgeous and insanely creative and wonderful. I feel like it does have some problems where certain plot points, I should say, don't make sense. I feel, at least on first watch, there's a whole musical number about how Jack Skellington is trying to figure out something about Christmas. He's trying to figure out the secret ingredient. He's trying to understand it, and he just doesn't. But it's never clear, why, and it just left me confused. It feels like the film didn't get you into his head as much as it should have, so you could understand why he still doesn't quite get Christmas. I think also there's some weird implications in the ideas you can pull out of it. Maybe it was just me watching for the first time and maybe not reading into certain aspects of the plot, but it feels like the moral of the movie is stay in your lane, which is weird to me because undoubtedly Jack Skellington's attempt at Christmas is a failure. He causes chaos, and Christmases are ruined until Santa Claus saves the day. It feels weird that that's the main point is don't try to do other things. I don't know. Maybe I'm not reading the plot correctly. Then I watched Vampire's Kiss, which we will be discussing on the podcast this coming Monday or Tuesday or whenever it comes out. But I have to say, this is genuinely one of the greatest films I've ever seen. It's incredible. And I'm not being ironic. It's genuinely amazing. What the fuck? After that, I watched Frozen. Wait, no, I didn't. After that, I watched Psycho, which, another classic Hitchcock film, incredibly influential on, horror movies in general. I feel like this always happens to me with most Hitchcock films, where I like certain aspects about them, but there's always something getting in the way of me just fully embracing them and loving them, with the exception of Rope. The parts you already know from Psycho, the parts that are just everywhere, are incredible. The conversations with Norman Bates are so fascinating and interesting. The, kill scenes they're very surreal feeling, and they're genuinely shocking. The tension that's built up throughout is really fantastic. That being said, I think this movie takes way too long to get started. That might be just because I know already what happens in Psycho, because of course I do. It's one of the most influential films of all time, and it has such a huge cultural presence that undoubtedly I already know what happens. So maybe if I had not known anything about this film before going into it, I would have been more engaged at the beginning, but it kind of felt like it was just biding its time getting to the hotel. I think part of it is like a bit of a, false flag to some extent, where there's a cop that is following our main character, and I think it was supposed to kind of trick the audience into thinking that the cop is the psycho. But yeah, that's definitely where I think the film falters a bit. Also, the explanation at the end and some scenes definitely aren't that engaging, but all the stuff with Norman Bates is amazing. After that, I watched Ivan's Childhood. This is the debut film of Andrei Tarkovsky, and I feel like, as always with his films, I hype myself up before I watch them, because so many people think his films are incredible and they're these life-changing experiences, and I don't blame them. There's a ton of very interesting stuff to discuss about his films, but for me it's never really connected. I've never had that click moment where I just get it, where a film just fully washes over me. But I always hype myself up before I watch them, thinking that this is going to be the one that I just fall in love with and I just completely understand. And it wasn't. It's an enjoyable movie. It's depressing, but I was never really roped into much of the plot in this movie. I think there are some scenes that are excellently done. The several parts where Ivan is imagining what happened to his family and thinking about if he could save them or not. Those are some really powerful and fantastically directed scenes, but a lot of it I just found kind of boring. I think especially the stuff with Marcia, the nurse, is just not interesting at all and feels pretty irrelevant to the rest of the plot and what I think is the much more interesting part of the movie. And I'm sure there are tons of analyses of this film that talk about the parts with Marcia and how they relate to the overall ideas of the film, but it just, it didn't really win me over. After that, I watched Big Hero 6. Big Hero 6, more like Big Hero 6 out of 10, because it was decent. Everyone who's ever given this movie a 6 out of 10 has made that joke. Big Hero 6 is it's an enjoyable animated movie. It's well made. It looks good. I think a lot of the emotional beats don't work super well, but it's still enjoyable. Yeah. And then I decided to watch Frozen. Frozen is really boring. I feel like before I watched it, I literally knew everything about it, and it felt like there was nothing to gain from watching it. It's just an okay animated movie, and that's kind of it. Then I watched The Kid Brother. It actually started this like a night ago, and then I wasn't in the mood, turned it off, came back to it, and it turned out to just be a really fun, enjoyable silent film. This is another Harold Lloyd film, and it's just a really fun, entertaining, goofy little silent film. And I think there's actually quite a bit of subtext you can kind of read into it about like the ideas of like manhood and what makes an ideal man. And I feel like to some extent the film sort of reinforces more negative aspects of that, but it's still fun. After that, I watched Shrek. For some reason, I had never seen Shrek before this, and I really should have, because it's a really great animated film. It's incredibly fun, it's playful, it's crass, there's a ton of personality in it. The dragon... Good movie. It's enjoyable, good. After that, I watched Shrek 2, which was also pretty good. It kind of just takes a lot of the ideas in the original and just kind of expands on them and makes the world more fleshed out and wider and more varying, but it really still kind of takes the angle of like satirizing a lot of Hollywood. You know, for that, it's very good. Really fun film. Yeah, I don't have much to say about it. After that, I watched The Killing. This is one of Stanley Kubrick's earlier films, and it's a pretty enjoyable neo-noir. I really like the way it's presented and the way that you constantly are told of like the different times that things are happening, and so you kind of like, as the film goes along, you get a bigger picture of everything. And yeah, it's just a fun, tense neo-noir film. After that, I watched City Lights, which is a Charlie Chaplin film. It's a really fun, goofy, enjoyable silent film. It is genuinely interesting how a lot of Charlie Chaplin films dive so heavily into commentary about, you know, poverty and, you know, the wealthy and mental health issues. It's actually pretty interesting to see how complex a lot of these goofy silent films are. And yeah, it's a fun time. I wasn't like blown away by it. It's definitely not my favorite Charlie Chaplin, but it's a good time. After that, I watched Aguirre, The Wrath of God, and it's a very depressing film about colonialism. One of the things I found while watching it is that the audio isn't great, and that definitely takes away from the movie. There's like apparently 3 different versions of the audio, or there's 2 different ones. The original on-set audio, I think, was lost, or at least was deemed unusable, so they re-recorded, or they dubbed everything, and they dubbed it in English. I believe they weren't happy with the English, so they did it again in German. And I watched the English one, and I wish I could have watched the German one. That might be a rewatch I have to do at some point, because I think just a lot of the sound design of the movie took a lot away from me. It just doesn't match up with like the documentary style of the film, and I really wish it was like re-recorded. There's lots of times where like tons of people are splashing around in the water and you hear like only one person walking through it. I definitely think it could have been better in that respect, and that definitely took a lot away from the film. But it still is a very interesting look at colonialism and the reasons as to why these, you know, explorers did what they did and what they were after. The soundtrack's amazing, and easily the thing for me that like holds everything together. It just gives it such an eerie, desolate feel. After that, I watched Marty, which is a pretty entertaining little romantic comedy. This film won Best Picture, and I enjoy it. I think a lot of it deals with like the societal pressures around, you know, being pressured into marrying someone, being pressured to like settle down, as well as a lot of the societal pressures that go into our ideas of beauty and who is good looking and who isn't. I do think it kind of gets into some incel shit at points. It sort of crosses the line for me. There's one point where Marty tries to kiss the girl he's, you know, on a date with, or, you know, he asks to kiss her and she refuses, and he, like, gets upset that she refused his kiss, and it's like, that's not, you can't get upset at that, dude. That's not how that works. But it was an enjoyable film. is good. After that, I watched Drunken Angel, another Kurosawa film. Man, there's nothing like a good Kurosawa film to just like breathe the life back into you. His films are just dripping with humanity and these incredible performances by Toshiro Mifune and Takashi Shimura. God damn, they are amazing in this film. It's such an interesting movie. A lot of it, I think, deals with this kind of like performative masculinity that Toshiro Mifune's character engages in. A lot of it kind of explores why he responds the way he does to learning that he's has like a horrible illness, and his performance is amazing as is expected. The same with Takashi Shimura. They're both incredible in this movie. This movie is amazing. Please go watch it, please. It's incredible. And then naturally, after watching an incredible, beautiful film like Drunken Angel, I watched Smosh the movie. This is, oh god, Smosh the movie is unbearable. It is, it is so terrible. Genuinely one of the worst films I've ever seen. It is so bad. Like, I can't even like go into describing how terrible this was. The performances are unwatchable, the jokes are terrible and awkward, and they go on forever. Just terrible. Don't watch it. It's not even like funny bad. Then after that, I watched the Lego Batman movie, which was genuinely great. It's one of the funniest movies I've seen so far in this challenge. I love the character arcs and development that Batman goes throughout this film, as he goes from this whiny, like entitled, like loser essentially, to being someone who genuinely cares for those around him. And it's really fantastically written. It's hilarious. The jokes are great. Yeah, it's just a great animated movie. After that, I watched Frozen 2. I have to say I enjoyed this a lot more than the first Frozen. I think that's partially because I didn't know what was going to happen. The first Frozen was such a cultural, like, powerhouse. You could not escape it. So I knew everything about it. But with Frozen 2, I knew basically nothing. And it turned out to be kind of wonderful in how stupid it is. It's so over the top, and I love that it plays into like the really dumb fantastical elements that are in the Frozen universe. A lot of the character arcs don't make that much sense, and a lot of the subplots don't make sense. Like, there's one where Anna has the feeling that Kristoff is going to break up with her, and Kristoff the entire time is trying to propose to her and figure out how. And Anna thinking that Kristoff is going to break up with her doesn't feel like it makes any, like, it doesn't make any sense. It's weird that you'd think he'd leave her, or like it's just not made clear as to why she thinks that. Man, it's incredibly dumb, and I kind of loved how stupid it was. The songs also are not very memorable in this movie, which is kind of a plus. And with that, that brings us to today, I guess, or yesterday at this point. So to start off, I watched A Man Escaped, directed by Robert Bresson, which is an incredible war film, which is about a French resistance fighter who's captured by the Nazis and explores his escape attempt. And yeah, I was just blown away by this film. It does so much with so little. A ton of this movie is just silence, or people just talking, or you just hear like all the minute details of what he's doing in his cell. And I think it does such a great job of just showing the oppression and awful situation that our main character's in. You know, it's just fantastic. I don't know. This one's gonna have to sit with me a bit more before I'm like fully able to describe why I loved it so much. After that, I watched Vampire. This is a 1932 horror film, and it is just really, really fantastic. There's so much like interesting psychological stuff that this film does that I think is incredibly unique, and at points was genuinely freaky, which it's kind of amazing to me that a horror film from the 1930s could like freak me out. I love especially like the shadows and how like there's no person there, you just get to see the shadow. That stuff is incredible, and the atmosphere that this film builds is really fantastic. And finally, the last film I watched was Ice Cold and Alex, which is a World War II film about a group of British soldiers, as well as some nurses, who go on a journey through German lines to get to Alexandria. And it's a pretty well done war movie. It's enjoyable, there's a good bit of tension. I think there's kind of a crappy shoehorned in romance subplot that shouldn't be in the movie. I don't know, it was enjoyable. It was a decent war film. It's worth checking out. There you go. There was week 1. I guess week 1 plus a little extra. 35 films in, and I'm feeling pretty good. So yeah, if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel. I'll be putting out the more weekly updates as I continue through this film journey. Yeah, remember to like the video. Comment below what your favorite film of the ones I've watched so far is, and what are your thoughts on them? So yeah, I'm not very good at outros. Anyway, I hope you have a wonderful day.